whether or not it's judged a success and what impact that has on Trump is something that we don't really know yet.
Mhm. And moving to Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marwashi, Donald Trump is saying the ceasefire is on life support, and we have latest reports showing actually Pakistan carrying a revised Iranian proposal to Washington. Is this still a negotiation, according to you, from where you're standing, or has the language of peace become more or less a cover for the next round of coercion and escalation?
I mean, any of those scenarios could occur. And this is primarily based on American patterns. If this was simply an attempt at buying time, I would say still it's positive from the perspective. And, if the Pakistan, the Islamabad process bought time, from the perspective of an Iranian family that was allowed to live another day, I would say that's a good thing. But it has been significant for this reason, in that it seems that both Iran and the U.S., particularly Trump, trusts Pakistan as a mediator. Trump has a respect for Field Marshal Munir. Iran shares a border with Pakistan. So I think the Islamabad process is genuine. It has made progress. It's a much better alternative to having continued the fight. But we've also have seen that on numerous occasions, the Trump administration has used negotiations as a pretense, only to attack Iran thereafter, whether it was the July war or this most recent war. So it's for that reason I'm very skeptical, I'm always pessimistic of what the U.S. might be doing at the end of the day. But I think it is a genuine process, and Pakistan has emerged as a genuine mediator in all of this.
Mm-hmm. And now, moving on back to the markets and the energy, let's say, scene with you, Alessandro Moroni. The IEA says commercial oil inventories are falling rapidly and that emergency stock releases are not endless, while Reuters is saying oil supply is expected actually to fall sharply because of the war. Now, from a defense perspective, can military escalation ever be detached from the energy consequences it creates?
Well, Trump already threatened military escalation, and actually it had to step back. First, because the American public doesn't want the boots on the ground. Second, because the inflation is hitting the purchase power of the American electorate. On top of that, of course, also European allies call for restraints, but their voice is hardly heard in the U.S. As a matter of fact, Trump has little options for escalation. Or to qualify it, there are options for escalation, but they are extremely costly in political and economic terms, and there is little chance they may overcome the Iranian resistance. As mentioned before by colleagues, Iran doesn't need to win, it needs only to survive. And I'll bring you another example. When there was the Greenland crisis in January, one of the reasons Trump stepped back was that the financial market got really nervous about the scenario of a fight between the US and another NATO member. So actually the market pressure adding to the energy pressure may be also in fact a factor in favor of dialogue rather than escalation.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And speaking of the escalation, of course, we have had a lot of talk about double standards when it comes to international law and applying the international rules-based order. And here, Dr. Gregory Simons, we have discussed this on so many occasions. But then, just for the fun of it, why does the West speak so forcefully about rules, sovereignty, and civilian protection in some wars, but sound far more flexible when its own strategic partners are involved? Is Iran really the case, finally making that contradiction impossible to hide?
Well, Iran is just the latest example, but it's a very blaring and blatant one. I mean, we have the same issue with Ukraine, for example, but Iran has really highlighted, especially to the global south, I mean, just the level of sheer hypocrisy, and especially I mean, Trump on the one hand with his flip-flopping and his recurrent dementia, his midnight tantrums on social media, but you've got these essentially toothless cretins, this parade of cretins from the EU who talk about sovereignty and all the rest of it, accuse Iran of being the aggressor in spite of the obvious who is doing the attacking, who is violating international law, who is violating humanitarian law, the rules of war. This is the US and Israel, but they cannot call it because of their subservience to Washington, but also they're conflicted with this kind of hatred of Trump. So they're caught in these two worlds. And I mean, the only one who's shown any kind of actual resistance to this is the Spanish Prime Minister. I mean, we've seen how Merz tried to pretend he is independent for a couple of moments when he said Iran has humiliated Trump. And then Trump humiliated Merz and Merz came crawling back. And I mean, in the words of Trump and his suggestion to Mohammed bin Salman to kiss that this is what he did. So, I mean, the rest of the world sees this now. I mean, they see the Minab massacre of schoolgirls, which the US tried to blame on Iran using Tomahawk missiles. I mean, the credibility of the US at its standing is plummeting, and I mean, it seems to be the final sort of spasms of what was Pax Americana, and more people are saying that, and this comes about a great deal owing to the lack of reliability and confidence in the US, but not only the US, the EU, and it's absolutely toothless, cowardly and pathetic display of subservience still to the idea of Pax Americana.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Gregory Simons. And let me bring back Mr. Paul Saunders now. Mr. Saunders, if we look back at the summit again between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, we have two leaders actually, according to Donald Trump, agreeing that Tehran must reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But we have also Reuters noting that Beijing gave no clear commitment to help end the war in Iran. Now, is Washington overestimating China's willingness to play the role of crisis manager, or underestimating Beijing's perhaps incentive to keep its distance?
Oh, I wouldn't really think about it in that way. I think that President Trump, like anyone who emerges from talks, was trying to frame the talks in a way that he felt was advantageous for him and for the United States. And it's fairly common, after big meetings to see one or more sides coming away with different public interpretations of what occurred. I wouldn't really read too much into that. I'm sure China does want the strait to be open. What we're actually seeing here is that China doesn't really have any tools to do that. And isn't willing to take the steps that it might have available to try to do that. So I think that's kind of what we're really seeing here. There's a danger, I think. Also, we had a brief conversation here about energy. There's a danger, really, that the Iranians may overplay their hand. And what I mean by that is, so far the global economy is kind of managing to cope with the oil shortages. They are having really terrible impacts in a variety of places, but the global economy as a whole is sort of coping with that. If we reach a point where the global oil economy really breaks, which one of the other guests mentioned, or perhaps you mentioned, might only be several weeks away, I think that really changes the equation very starkly. And I would point out that after Russia cut off its gas supplies to Europe to try to use that as leverage over the war in Ukraine, it did not lead Europe to surrender in the way that the Russian government thought that it might. It actually led Europe to pull together and to do much, much more to support Ukraine. So I think Iran should really be quite careful, actually, about allowing this situation to go on much longer, because it could really lead to a very different response from the United States.
But then, Mr. Paul Saunders, you said perhaps it is in the interest of China for the Strait of Hormuz to reopen again. But then if we come to look at the reports, we see that there are a lot of indications that energy products are still reaching China despite the US blockade. And here, if China is willing to play any role, don't you think that it's going to give it some kind of a leverage over the United States?
Look, China has been preparing for 25 years actually to have its oil supplies cut off by the United States. It just happened not in the way that they expected that it might, and not in the strait that they expected it would. So I think China, certainly much more so than, for example, Japan or South Korea, is in a strong position to deal with this situation. At the same time, it is a disruptive situation. Oil is about half again as expensive as it was just a few months ago. And, yes, China is a reasonably wealthy country and has a lot of tools at its disposal and can get the oil that it needs. I'm sure they would rather pay $67 a barrel than 102.
Thank you, Mr. Paul Sanders. And now let me move to Dr. Ibrahim now, Ibrahim al-Marashi. When the war drags on like this, even the White House is admitting that the issue is politically costly. How do you read the legitimacy crisis around U.S. policy in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, I think even though they don't say it publicly, I think all the members of the Gulf Cooperation Council are rethinking their relationship with the U.S. Is it really protection or a liability? I think rarely in the history of the region have the Gulf states questioned their relation to this extent with the U.S. Kuwait, after all, owes its existence to American support. Now it's becoming a target due to American forces there. The Saudi-U.S. relationship from World War II, I don't think it's ever reached such a critical crisis. So for that reason, at least during the Trump administration, I think a lot of the Gulf states kind of have learned a lesson and are going to now hedge. In other words, try to find other security partners. Hypothetically, that could be bringing in China more, developing their own capabilities more, defense capabilities, that is. Hypothetically, the Gulf countries also have a working, they do have some dialogues with NATO that could be explored. They do have some agreements. But at the end of the day, what is interesting is I really wonder if the Gulf states will actually start working together to defend themselves. This still seems to be elusive, never mind the barrages they've endured from Iran.
Perfect. And since you mentioned NATO, let me ask this question to Mr. Alessandro Moroni. Reuters is saying Trump's feud with allies is likely to outlast the Iran war, with European governments actually trying to increase their own defense cooperation as Washington becomes less predictable. So does this crisis push Europe towards strategic autonomy of some sort, or does it simply expose how dependent it still is on the United States?
Well, actually both, because by exposing the dependence to an ally that turned to be much more unreliable and unpredictable is leading even pro-Atlanticist, pro-NATO governments such as Italy, Germany, Poland, or UK to reconsider their strategic assumptions. So I think Europe as a whole is moving towards a higher level of strategic autonomy. I mean, it's not black and white. Europe can be more autonomous by the US by investing more on its military capabilities, by increasing its defense industry, its technologies in certain sectors. But in other sectors, like the nuclear umbrella, it remains heavily dependent by the US. So the European government in large and medium countries are investing both at national level, are investing in bilateral cooperation, in regional cooperation, for example, the Baltic states, Scandinavia, or let's say in a core group. And it's interesting the fact that France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom have been consulting much more than in the past, often also with Poland, and they turn this consultation into, let's say, a core group, an avant-garde, both within NATO and within the European Union. And I'm talking about NATO because for Europeans, the most effective way to become more autonomous by the US actually is not to building some form of European army, which is not going to work, but is to build a stronger pillar of NATO. That means using NATO command and control, infrastructure, bases, plans, but with a much limited US role and a much larger European role. I mean, Italy will take the lead of the Joint Force Command Naples in that supervise all NATO posture in the Mediterranean Sea. And it's the first time an Italian will take the torch by a US commander.
Mm-hmm. And now let's see how the Global South is reading the war with you, Dr. Gregory Simons. Again, if we look at the reports, we have many countries in Asia turning to perhaps government-led oil deals and the system outside of the usual, sometimes outside the dollar system even, because of the crisis around Hormuz. Now, is the Global South interpreting this war as a security story, an energy story, or proof that the old Western order no longer guarantees stability and hence, the change?
Well, yes, but before I start this, I'd like to point out a slight inaccuracy that Mr. Saunders mentioned that Russia has stopped the gas supplies to the European Union. But if we go back historically, we had Condoleezza Rice saying that the intention of the US was to decrease European reliance on Russian energy and increase their reliance on US energy. Fast forward to Biden, who said if Russia goes into Ukraine, the Nord Stream pipelines will finish. And then they carried out what they said they would do. So after blowing up Nord Stream pipeline, plus the sanctions imposed by the US via Europe on energy supplies and so forth, which has destroyed the European economy. So this is not quite as it was characterized. I mean, this has been a situation which is forced, and it's against European interests, especially economic interests. Coming back to, the Global South does see this as desperation of this American empire, that it's an act. Some see it as, for example, the attack, the unprovoked aggression on Iran is a string, so it's not isolated, but connected to what happened with the US aggression, unprovoked aggression against Venezuela, then the US unprovoked aggression against Nigeria, and we have it against Iran and threatened against Cuba, threatened against Greenland. that this is seen in geo-economic terms. That is, the US is trying to get a monopolized situation of supplies of energy, raw earths, and these kind of strategic materials. I mean, the aim here is not absolutely directly at Iran, Venezuela, Nigeria, etc., but as a means to get to weakening and containing China and China's economic rise. So this is how a number of Global South see this, so that this is part of a bigger picture and an act of desperation by the US. Because ever since Biden and Trump is just merely going along with this, Biden was talking about the US retaking its global leadership role. And Trump, I mean, he won the election based on being a peace president and no more endless wars. I mean, he's criticized in the past Obama and others and said if there is a war against Iran, that this is a sign of weakness and desperation by the president. So he's doing everything that he told, criticized others for potentially doing. So the Global South sees this, and Trump clearly does not care about anyone else other than himself and how he appears on the world stage. Yeah, and US is not seen as anything close to being reliable. As has been noted, the reliability. I mean, you've got especially the Gulf states by now, I think with one exception, see having US military bases on their soil is not a security guarantee. Now, it's an insecurity guarantee because US interests and actions can diverge from the national interests and national security of the state that is hosting them. And this is clearly demonstrated in the second Iran war, because if we remember, I mean, that this is the second time that an unprovoked war of choice and aggression has been launched against Iran since June last year. So never have you had a president who pledged to be a peace president, who tried to buy his way into a Nobel Peace Prize, create so many wars, so much conflict, and walk away like some kind of Nero, setting the whole world on fire while he tries to look like he's in charge.
Mm-hmm. So it's a geopolitical trap and miscalculation, perhaps, for the entire White House that was caused by the strategic interest of a foreign ally, Dr. Gregory Simons. And here, let me bring Paul Saunders to comment on this. Mr. Paul, Reuters again reported that U.S. intelligence is studying how Iran might react if Donald Trump declares unilateral victory, because officials fear the war could actually become a political liability, or some analysts are saying it already is. So at what point does a conflict sold as leverage become a strategic trap for the United States itself, according to you?
Well, first, since Professor Simons likes corrections, let me just observe that I don't remember seeing any American officials go to Russia and turn off the valves on the gas pipelines that were going to Europe. I think it was Russians who did that. And, if you want to have a show to talk about the events that led up to that, we can do that. It was a complicated picture and both sides did things. But my point in raising that was that the Russians turned off the gas and it didn't produce the outcome that they expected that it would. And where the conflict in Iran is concerned, it's not a popular war in the United States, as I mentioned it. It's not a decision I might have made if I were elected president. Nobody elected me president. What's important here is that in a period of several weeks, as oil supplies start to run out, refineries will start shutting down and factories will start losing access to products they need. And that won't happen only in the United States, it'll happen all around the world. And actually the countries that are wealthier will be sort of better able to cope with that than the ones that are less wealthy. And when that occurs, it will start to cause not just temporary economic harm, but lasting economic harm. And when it starts to cause lasting economic harm, the leverage that Iran has from closing the strait will no longer exist in the same way that the leverage that Russia hoped to use by shutting off the gas will no longer exist. And in the same way, by the way, that sanctions lose their value as leverage after they're imposed. These are all the same things. Once people really have to face those costs, they learn how to adapt. They're forced to adapt, and then they live with the consequences. And if Iran does that to the United States, it may, prove to be a very expensive conflict for the United States. It will prove to be an extremely expensive conflict for Iran. And that, I think, is what everyone should be thinking about at this point, and trying to find a way to avoid a situation in which the United States faces those costs, in which Iran faces those costs, and which everybody else on the planet who uses oil and oil products and the things that we make from oil products will be forced to experience. That's what we should be focused on here.
Mm-hmm. And in light of this situation, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marashi, in light of what our distinguished guest just mentioned, do you think that this war actually is really accelerating the global South drift away from Western financial and political dependence, in light of what's happening around the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, you're hearing once again the questioning of this phenomena known as the petrodollar, where oil, hydrocarbons were sold around the world in US dollars. You're hearing now of questioning of this arrangement where basically any country around the world, if they want to purchase oil from the Middle East, India, if they want to purchase Middle Eastern oil, they do it in US dollars. I think there's been a questioning of this arrangement about now the possibility of future oil deals being done in currencies such as yuan, for example. But the other, I think, great geopolitical shift is I think around the world, people are suffering because of America's attack on Iran. It's the people who are paying the price around the world, the higher gases, whether in Europe, even to, let's say, Bangladeshi textile entrepreneurs who knew that thread depended on petrochemical byproducts that came out of the Gulf. They are bearing the cost. And so this is what I wonder is, on a global level, how many people are bearing the cost of America's action? America and Israel's action, let's not forget. And I think this is going to cause a great questioning of the U.S.'s, actions and their repercussions. And if this is going to have a genuine questioning, then, let's hope that this would lead to a shift to renewables in a variety of other countries, so they lessen their dependence on this great kind of geopolitical order that is, more or less dominated by Washington.
Mm-hmm. And in light of what you said, let me link this question to Mr. Alessandro Moroni. Mr. Alessandro, a lot is happening, a lot of people are being impacted, and I wanted to ask you about Europe in particular. We can notice that there are many fronts this war is being fought at. So, for example, we have reports showing that market impact is not just confined to oil. It is hitting inflation, bonds, shipping, industrial planning across the G7. So at what point do you think this war is going to become a wider war against the European system, a system shock for Europe's defense posture and also economic resilience?
Oh, that's a very good question, but let me precise that after the energy supplies from Russia to Europe were interrupted, there's been a cost for Europe. Sure, the sanctions have been expensive, but the European economy is better off with less Russian supplies, because now the energy mix is more diversified, is more sustainable, is more green, and therefore Europe is stronger now than 5 years ago. And by the way, Russia is declining demographically because it's lost more than 1,200,000 people in Ukraine, including dead, injured, and prisoner, and more than 1.5 million Russians entered the European Union to escape the situation in Russia, because in Europe there is a better quality of life and the life expectancy is here higher than Russia. Having said that, the European economy proved resilient to COVID, resilient to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, I live in Italy, and in Italy the unemployment rate is 5%, half than 10 years ago. And therefore, the premises to mitigate the damages done by Israel and US attacks over Iran. Of course, it's a matter of how long the war endures, how high the oil prices will get before some form of truce or peace deal is done. One of the repercussions is that Europe is cutting, is making more debt at national level, more debt at EU level to support the economy. This was already done after the COVID experience, when the European Union issued a EU debt to help the recovery of the economies and its members. It may be done something similar if the situation gets really bad in terms of energy prices and the economy. But for the time being, the investment, for example, on defense budgets are continuing, because Europe realized that it has to defend itself from Russia with much less support and much more uncertain support from the US. So we see an investment in rearming Europe continuing in 2026, despite the pressure to shift resources to cope with inflation and the energy crisis.
Perfect. And now, Dr. Gregory Simons, Reuters also notes that the Trump-Xi meeting actually produced some sort of stability language, but left major questions open, for example, on trade, on Taiwan, and Iran, as we said earlier. Now, in your view, is the summit best understood as real diplomacy or as careful, staged, perhaps, messaging designed to calm markets and manage public expectations?
It is a great deal of perception management, but before I answer this, I'll just get back to Mr. Saunders. He is correct, Russia turned off the gas supplies, but he did not explain why they turned it off. And this was because of the sanctions which the US imposed on its EU vassals made it legally impossible for them to pay for the gas. So when you get a consumer that is deliberately delinquent in paying for their supplies, the natural response is to turn it off. The US response to blow up the pipelines, I think, is a much more greater escalation. But yes, coming back to the Xi-Trump summit, I mean, this is a bit of window dressing by Trump. He tries to present himself as this great leader, but he was definitely in the disadvantage, because, I mean, he went there and it was uncertain in what he was going to come away with, because he was in the weaker position, and that was clear. I mean, just look at some of the optics. For example, Besant, who went to enter a building but lacked the security credentials, was stopped by Chinese security guards and had to be given his credentials by those around him. Otherwise, he would not be let in. So the Chinese, in this one small demonstration, show that this is not like what the US and the EU are about, rules for thee but not for me, but this actual rules apply to everyone. And I mean, the Chinese are, of course, always a much longer term strategic, along with the Iranians, I would add, have a much longer term and strategic vision. I mean, the US is notorious for its flip-flopping between different presidential administrations. And I mean, this Trump administration is absolutely notorious for flip-flopping constantly. But Trump is about these performative sound bites. So he did not come out looking good. And Xi was clearly the one calling the shots here. I mean, Trump could make some kind of request. The Chinese would smile and say, yes, yes, but this doesn't mean they will do it. The Chinese are acting in Chinese interests. And as far as the Chinese are concerned, that the destruction of Iran is not in their interests. And we got to remember here the elephant in the room. We haven't really mentioned the biggest elephant in the room, Netanyahu and Israel, who are continually trying to push for a resumption of the kinetic phase of this war. I mean, Katz, the defense minister, was saying they're waiting for the green light from the US to resume the war. So Netanyahu requires this war to keep out of jail for his corruption and abuse of power scandals, which were even relevant before the October 2023 event. So, and I think Trump now is in the situation where even Trump understands that this war has cost him politically massively. He is in a situation he really can't get out of clearly. And every time he tries, I mean, we just look at the Islamabad discussions with Iran, Pakistan mediating, and US, when J.D. Vance was on the phone, not only to Trump, but Netanyahu. And why you have a vice president on the phone to a head of a foreign power, I mean, it doesn't bode well for any kind of, should we say, agency that Trump can just snap his fingers. Like, if we remember, even before he was inaugurated, he said that he would end the Ukraine war in one day. And now we got to the situation where he started a war of choice through probably leverage which is not yet publicly known or confirmed, and he is trapped.
Perfect. And now, very briefly, from every one from my guests here, just an endgame scenario. Let's begin with you, Mr. Paul Saunders. Very quickly, how do you imagine this ending?
Well, first of all, since I was again corrected, let me just say that it wasn't the United States that destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. All available information points to Ukraine. And secondly, if it's legitimate for Iran to close the Gulf, the Strait, by attacking tankers that are trying to go through the Strait, it's not clear to me why it's illegitimate to close the pipeline. I think you kind of have to have both or neither on that one. Moving forward, look, the clock is ticking. I tried to say that earlier. Either we will have a diplomatic resolution to this over the course of the next few weeks, which I think everyone should hope for, but I fear is far away because I think the two sides are still pretty far apart. Or I think we're going to have cascading global economic damage. And we're probably going to see further and much more dramatic military action from the United States at that time.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul Saunders, for all the sharp analysis. Let me move now to Alessandro Moroni. Could you please briefly tell us how do you see the endgame scenario?
I partly agree with Paul because there may be an escalation, there may be a diplomatic solution, but let me also bring a third scenario. It may also happen that, as a matter of fact, Trump will unilaterally decide to end the war and claim victory, even if he didn't achieve a victory. But since he has no clear strategy and the war started upon the wrong assumption that the Iranian leadership would have been collapsed, and it did not collapse, actually, the US are struggling to find a way out. So one way out would be to change the narrative and say that some objective has been achieved and that we can go business as usual. But the question mark is that how Iran, what Iran will ask to go to business as usual. So we may end up with a paradoxical situation that before the beginning of the war, Iran did not control the Strait of Hormuz. After this scenario of a unilateral end of the war, Iran may exert some control on the Strait of Hormuz. But again, this one scenario, the other two of escalation or diplomatic solution are possible too.
Perfect. Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marashi, very briefly, please.
As a historian, there is no end game. Remember the 1991 Gulf War didn't have an end game. It led to the 2003 Iraq War. We have to look at the big picture. The ramifications of this war are going to last decades. 1953, the U.S. went into Iran, launched a coup. The backlash of that, the blowback was the 1979 revolution. So I don't think there will be an end game in this. The ramifications will unfold over decades.
Dr. Gregory Simons, very briefly, please.
The Americans seem to have the memory of a goldfish. Because, I mean, they talk about these rules of international law and of this law of the sea, yet it's not so long ago that they were blowing up fishing boats in the Caribbean and murdering the survivors. So the world see this. The Strait of Hormuz is going to remain under Iranian and probably Omani control because the US and Israeli illegal war of aggression has meant that this is going to be the case. The US is probably going to be forced out of West Asia, and Iran is going to be much stronger than it was. And you can see that already the alignment in the global south, especially Russia, China, and Iran, are perhaps seeing a new world order. This global south continues to rise while Pax Americana and the global north sinks.
Thank you so much. We have to end it there. My thanks to all my guests. Dr. Gregory Simons, thank you so much. Alessandro Moroni, appreciate it. Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marashi, thank you as well. And Mr. Paul Saunders, thank you for all the sharp analysis. And thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News Special. Until next time, have a good one.